Thank you for being with us, Yoav. Pleased to welcome you virtually to VMware Explore 2022.
It's a pleasure. Wish I could be there physically, but didn't work out this year.
Well, next time in Barcelona in November, hopefully. We're going to get right into the questions, Yoav, because I think the audience will be very interested in this project. Many central banks around the world are exploring CBDCs. We need to understand exactly what CBDCs are. So can you enlighten us a little bit? And then we're going to get into some of the main motivations for Israel to issue a digital shekel.
Right. So really very basically, if you think about it, today we the public have two sorts of money with which we can pay each other or in businesses and etc. We have central bank issued cash, which is a physical sort of money. You have to actually meet each other in order to pay with central bank money. And we have commercial bank issued money, which is digital, with which you can pay via credit cards or checks or bank transfers and etc. CBDC would actually be providing the public with the means to pay digitally in central bank money. So sort of like taking the central bank cash and putting it in the digital form, which would enable us to pay remotely and etc. This is getting more and more important as the economy is becoming more digital and much more of our transactions are being done remotely. Okay, think about it. Years ago, if you wanted to go to the movies, you could decide if you wanted to pay by central bank money, cash, or commercial bank money, credit card, for example. These days, when you go to a movie in your own living room, watching whichever streaming content you prefer, there's no way to pay for that with central bank money, right? You can only use digital money. So this is sort of why central banks are considering to enable the public to use digital money, central bank issued digital money in some of the transactions.
Thank you for that explanation. And for Israel specifically, what are the main motivations to issue a digital shekel and the timing also right now?
So under this sort of overall principle, okay, our CBDC steering committee has identified actually 6 different motivations that may be relevant specifically for Israel. We don't really have a time frame for these yet. This is just a project where we are looking into the possibility of issuing a CBDC. But if we would decide to do that, we think these are relevant motivations. I'll try and go over them very briefly. Okay, the first is competition. If you think about it, cash actually puts competition on the commercial payment system. And we want to maintain this competition into the digital world. And you also want to maintain competition in future means of payments technology might bring into our lives and ensure that the central bank money is still relevant. The second motivation that we highlighted is innovation. There's only what you can do these days with money. And actually DLT technologies brought all sorts of ideas such as smart contracts and programmable money and things like that. And we're really exploring whether these could be actually used in day-to-day payments of ordinary people and not just, in large financial transactions and things like that. This is something we actually looked into in the experiment that we did in the public. The third is cross-border payments. Israel is a very open economy. People like to travel a lot. They like to buy a lot online. Cross-border payments are still very inefficient and very expensive. And if the world actually goes towards a direction where CBDC is the solution for that, it will definitely be important for Israel to also take part in this solution. In Israel, another thing that's very important is, of course, resilience of the payment system. You want to make sure that you have alternatives to pay, even if the existing payment systems fail, whether it's for a local reason, such as power outage in your grocery store, or a general catastrophe. So CBDC could be an additional payment system that we could use. One thing that's relatively unique for Israel is that in Israel, the government has a policy to reduce the use of cash. And CBDC could actually be another means of payment for some of the populations that actually prefer to use cash these days. Maybe we could move them towards using CBDC if we are able to provide that on a relatively simple and accessible device, such as just a smart card as opposed to a smartphone or something like that. And the last thing that we have identified is maybe the possibility to enable people to pay digitally with a limited amount of privacy. I guess we could get into this one more deeper in a minute.
It's really interesting because we heard, in a lot of these CBDC projects, privacy is a barrier to adoption. So let's elaborate on that a little bit. What would be the right balance of privacy in digital payments? What would that look like, Yoav?
Right. So that's a good question. Actually, if you think about it, these days, we actually have two kind of really distinct possibilities. If we pay, with central bank money, okay, cash, the transaction is completely anonymous, right? Cash doesn't carry any information regarding who is doing the transaction, who is paying who, how much they are paying for, and what they're paying for. However, if I use my commercial bank money, for example, my credit card, then my bank and my credit card company, they know everything, right? They know that Yoav was paying for pizza this evening, this and this amount of money, okay? And he was also doing it yesterday. Therefore, Yoav probably likes to eat pizza, and let's shoot him out with commercials and stuff like that. Maybe that's good, okay? Maybe I want them to know what I'm paying for and to offer me all sorts of business offers for that. Maybe I want that private, okay? Maybe sometimes I want to be paying with the commercial institution knowing my payment, and sometimes I may want to maintain my privacy because I'm buying flowers to my wife and I don't want her to see on our joint credit card statement, for example. So you could think of limiting privacy in a way that CBDC would never be as anonymous as cash, because we're all aware of the problems that anonymity of cash is creating to, tax enforcement, to anti-money laundering enforcement. However, we may be able to allow people to sometimes pay privately for specific amounts, maybe some people and not other people, maybe private people and not businesses, maybe for small transactions and not big transactions, maybe for specific transactions. Maybe we could decide that if you're paying your psychologist, for example, your bank should not be able to know about it. However, if you're, I don't know, in the United States and you're paying for weapons or something like that, then automatically, the FBI should be able to be around the transaction or whatever. So policymakers should be able to make a decision, and the technology so far did not really enable that. We really had just these two very distinct options.
Great. That is the point. So when you tested VMware blockchain and our technology called UTT, untraceable transactions with accountable privacy, how did it support this balance of privacy or this limited privacy as you such described?
Actually, when we were looking into this issue of privacy and we're asking ourselves how we could kind of explore that technologically, other than just speaking about the principles that I just mentioned, we came across a great team from VMware actually in Israel, very close to us, and they told us we actually have a solution for what you were looking for. What is your solution? So they told us about UTT, where you can actually, the policymaker could actually define sort of what they call a privacy budget. I could call that sort of a periodical limit. The policymaker, be it the government or the central bank or the tax authority, could actually decide that they are allowing each individual to pay with private money, with sort of anonymous money, okay, or what they call private digital shekels, okay, but to some amount. For example, you could decide that each individual could have 1,000 private shekels a month that they can pay with. So this is really just one element of privacy that we were talking about earlier, right? We were talking about specific transactions, specific people, okay, specific amounts. So this is really a technology to limit the amount of privacy that people could use. So if the authorities decide that each individual is allowed to pay privately each month with, for example, 1,000 shekels, this technology actually supports that. It was interesting, by the way, that while we were implementing this together with them, we also, first of all, we kind of improved their thinking regarding the technology, because our business logic was kind of brought into the thinking regarding the technology, and we actually added a few elements that were not really there to start with, but it also raised a lot of policy questions on our side. For example, what is this right privacy budget? How do you decide on it? Is it the same budget for each individual? Maybe, for example, children should have different privacy budgets than adults. Maybe individuals should have different privacy budgets than businesses, for example. Maybe businesses should not be able to pay privately at all, because businesses are actually, they're supposed to surrender their incomes to the tax authorities and etc. So a lot of both technological questions and policy questions actually came out of our work together with the VMware team here.
Great. We're both learning from each other. I'm glad to hear that, Yoav. And I guess that leads into the last question, nice segue, which is, what are the next steps, the next milestones for the Digital Shekel CBDC project?
So our project actually has 4 kind of different avenues that it's going along. One is indeed the technological avenue. So we will be continuing to do all sorts of technological experiments and looking into motivations and specific elements that are of interest for us to technologically test the ability to support these, just like we did with privacy. Another is, of course, the economic analysis. So we're doing a lot of economic, macroeconomic, monetary economics, financial stability analysis regarding the implications of CBDC on the Israeli economy. We are also writing a paper of characteristics and requirements for how CBDC would look like in Israel if we decide to issue it. And from that, we are kind of deriving all sorts of questions and work items that we need to go through. Last but not least, we're thinking of a plan to what would actually bring us to a decision towards issuing or not issuing a CBDC. What would be the parameters of the economy, of the technology, of the financial system that might move us from where we are right now at the next sort of an exploration stage towards a future maybe decision that would put us in a completely different stage of work towards issuing a CBDC somewhere in the future.
Well, that's great, Yoav. This is fascinating, and I wish you the best of luck in your endeavor. You are the project manager and also the advisor to the Deputy Governor of Bank of Israel. Wanted to thank you again for being here, and we hope to see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation, and we'll definitely be following what goes on there.
Thank you so much.